Hi, my name's Al Hari, my pronouns are they, them, and I'm very autistic about this band called Steam Powered Giraffe. Today I'd like to talk about disability representation in the characters of SPG, because honestly this silly robot band has some of the best disability rep I've ever seen. We should start with a quick introduction to SPG for those of you who don't know them. SPG is a band of robot characters who sing and dance and do improv on stage. The robots have their own backstories, and there are copious amounts of lore for other characters in things like the comic, which I'll get back to later. The first character I want to talk about is Rabbit. She has a stutter portrayed as glitches in her vocals. To my knowledge, her actor Isabella Bunny Bennett doesn't have a stutter herself, but has managed to create the best stutter representation I've ever seen. One of the most prominent reasons I love Rabbit's stutter so much is simply because it's unremarkable. It's just a part of who she is in the same way her wacky nature and silly personality are. None of the other robots ever comment on it. No one ever interrupts her, guesses what she's trying to say, or expresses annoyance that she's taking so long to say something. And as someone with a really bad stutter, who many times has had strangers insert their own words into my mouth before I can finish speaking, it's so refreshing to see a character who stutters where no one ever does that. Everyone patiently waits for her to get through the word, even during improv bits where they're all talking over each other and they'd have an excuse to interrupt. Now, what about the specifics of her portrayal? Firstly, I think disabled robots are a very interesting topic that I could talk forever about and all the ways human disabilities can translate into mechanical ones, but I won't go too far into that. I will say that a stuttering robot makes sense, as even the other robots' vocal programming glitches out sometimes. Rabbit's also had her jaw traumatically torn out, which adds a physical reason as well. SPG started out busking in San Diego, and thus their performances were often fairly short. Watching older videos of Rabbit, she appears to stutter more often. As they graduated to hour-long shows, it becomes less frequent. From the beginning, though, her introduction and other more scripted bits usually had her stuttering. This makes sense, as Rabbit's stutter often includes additional vocal effects to make it sound like a glitchy computer, and I'd imagine it's easier for Isabella to practice specific words. And when she's acting for an hour plus in a row, I don't really mind her stutter taking more of a backseat in favor of cracking jokes. Many people with stutters often have trouble with specific sounds. For example, I can stutter on anything, but it's more likely that I'll trip up on D, R, a hard G like in goose, and a hard C like in car. I don't have specific data on this, but from the videos I've watched, Rabbit stutters on her own name, the letter D, the letter Y, and repeats one-syllable words,
a tip, top idea.
Although it varies and she can get tripped up anywhere.
Ladies and gentlemen and beautiful creatures of all shapes and sizes, we are the robots that you heard so much about. And all the stories are true. Why, we are capable of imitating human life down to a T.
Her stutters are usually accompanied with physical movements like twitching of her head or arms.
It's good to have you back. I know you performed with us in the past.
It complements the idea that she's glitching, but some folks who stutter do the same thing. I tend to blink really hard or squeeze my eyes shut until I get the sound out. My last point about Rabbit is that she is a wonderful break from already rare stutter representation, where the person with a stutter is a shy, anxious nerd. Not that you can't stutter and be a shy, anxious nerd, because that's literally me. But when practically every mainstream media depiction of stuttering paints it as a symptom of anxiety, Rabbit's personality is a breath of fresh air. She's outgoing, loud, and half of her vocabulary is stupid puns. She performs on stage in front of crowds, stutters proudly, and none of her siblings are rude about it. The next two characters are exclusive to the SPG comic and have never featured on an album. Maybe the seventh will change that? I'll start with Peter Walter VI because I have less to say about him. According to the official timeline, Six was repairing a tear in space-time when he ended up in an implosion of blue matter energy. For context, blue matter is a radioactive material, sort of creativity incarnate, that can do things like power giant mechanical giraffes and give robots sentience. So clearly the implosion had some effect on Six's face, likely scarring it at the minimum. Six wears a mask that covers his face, and we've never seen him without it. This is a little troubling because people with facial differences are often treated like they have to hide their faces away for other people's comfort. Six's mask can be read as such. However, it could also be argued that there are other potential reasons he wears a mask. Maybe it's because the scars are sensitive and he doesn't want any wayward robot shenanigans hitting his face. Given blue matter's radioactivity, it's also possible that his face is radioactive and he wears the mask to protect others. Both reasons are a little flimsy due to not being canonically confirmed, and I really hope the 7th will give more insight into his face situation, seeing as the promo art has his broken mask. The second comic character is Norman, who I love very much. Norman is disabled in multiple ways and has been since 1950, when a blue matter explosion changed him physically and gave him brain damage. The official timeline reads, Dr. Norman Becile is misshapen into a crippled, monstrous form. His brilliant mind suffers a great loss of its mental function. Which is an iffy description, but the timeline page was first written over 13 years ago and hasn't been updated in like 7 years, so I feel like the language can be excused, especially because Norman's portrayal in the comic is so positive. We're introduced to Norman in page 13 of the comic when the protagonist Laureen is entering Walter Manor for the first time. His first panel is set up like he's about to attack her with a battle axe and red eyes. His appearance adds to this idea. He's green, scaly, with jagged spines coming out of his back and a long pointy tongue. He's what you would expect an enemy in a video game to look like, which is why the very next panel is so jarring. Turns out he was just going to scratch his back with a giant axe. Laureen, who is a, quote, normal human being that's never interacted with anyone from Walter Manor before, is terrified. Norman even forgets that his appearance might be shocking. He's very chill about the whole thing. It's also relevant to note his oven mitt, worn over his lobster fingers, which seems to be more for convenience grabbing things rather than hiding away his differences. Anyway, Laureen very quickly gets over the shock and talks to him like she would anyone else. And, to be fair, she's also terrified of Rabbit and Spine at first, not just Norman. Through the timeline, it's also implied that Wanda Walter married him, seeing as later on she's listed as Wanda Becile, which is Norman's legal last name. All personal feelings aside about how Norman would 100% take the Walter name instead because the Beciles suck, I think it's great that he's found love. Disabled people are so often infantilized, especially those with intellectual disabilities, and treated like any sort of romance is too complicated for them to understand. Even though Norman and Wanda never interact in the comic, the fact that their marriage is even implied at all is very refreshing. Overall, I think Norman is good representation, and I really hope we see more of him in the comic, or maybe even an album. The last totally canon aspect of representation I'll be talking about here is all 6 of the Walter automatons and Trauma. You might be thinking, I thought this was a family-friendly band who makes silly jokes, and yeah, they might sing about sad things, but Trauma? And I'm just going to tell you that the bots have canonically served in 4 separate wars. The timeline even specifies that after the Vietnam War, Rabbit, Spine, and John's battered chassis returned to the manor. Like, SPG, you didn't have to specify that. This, obviously, would give anyone PTSD. The bots even had a flashback to the Weekend War during a 2013 show, where their files were corrupted and they started replaying audio recordings from the fight. Rabbit calls out for her pappy, Peter Walter I. Hatchworth cries out for Spine, and Spine urges Rabbit to get up. It's a lot, and honestly, I can see why they stopped doing it during normal concerts. It's a little too scary, especially for little children. Their typical concerts don't really have moments like these, presumably because they want the audience to have fun and laugh at their improv instead of sobbing over the robots having war flashbacks. Individual robots have experienced specific trauma on top of this too. Rabbit was originally built to be a woman modeled after Delilah Morio. After Delilah's death, Peter 1 breaks her core and rips her jaw off. She doesn't tell anyone until Peter 6 found her original blueprints over 100 years later. Hatchworth was locked in a vault for 70 years for his faulty core, the terrible conditions of which are shown in the comic, and Zero was abandoned in a basement for 90 years. The music video for Lying Awake definitely touches on how traumatizing this was for him. I mean, come on. Again, these things aren't really mentioned in shows, only the comic and maybe hinted at in music videos, and honestly, I'm fine with that. These next few thoughts are my personal interpretations and headcanons about the robots, which do have some proof to them, but are largely self-indulgent. While I love to interpret them in this way, I'm not going to force these ideas onto anyone. If you came just to see the canon disability representation, you can leave now. But maybe don't. Let me tell you why all the robots are neurodivergent first. As I mentioned before, I'm autistic and my brain is a funky little soup. I love robots. I love stories where robots are disabled, where, yes, they could have been fixed to function properly, but robots are people too. They don't need to be fixed if they don't want to. I also relate to robots. I'm a cyborg with what's basically an artificial organ, and even though the trope is kind of tiring from an objective standpoint, I love when sentient robots in fiction are given a bunch of autistic traits. Which is why I love looking at all 6 Walter automatons and going, oh, they're all autistic, huh? Rabbit's frequent raptor hands, the spine's overwhelming love of cowboys and boring books, even Zero's imagination and stubbornness can be interpreted as autistic. Honestly, I just get the vibe from all of them. From the first time I listened to Lying Awake, I interpreted it as being about dissociation, and honestly, it would be very difficult to convince me that it's not. The setting for the music video is a basement in which Zero is sitting against a pole, moving only his head. There are other shots where he's standing, but the main focus seems to be the basement and this stage. While he's on the stage, Zero isn't wearing his usual outfit, and the quality is even more glitchy than the other shots in the video. As the music video ends, we hear a tape ejecting and see the text on screen, right before Stage Zero appears to wake up. I interpreted this as Zero stuck in the basement, imagining himself singing and dancing like his siblings, and when he finally rejoins the band, he's allowed to do so, hence his stage self waking up. It's going to be hard to pick specific lyrics to support this point, because they kind of all do, so instead I'll choose a selection and encourage you to listen to the song again with this idea in mind. First, the chorus. Lying awake, being miles away, and still so far away are fairly common ways to describe someone who's dissociating. It often feels like your body is stuck in place while your mind floats away. Sometimes it's like your brain's left your body and you're watching it from the outside. Other times your thoughts are going so fast or so slow that you lose control of them. It seems to me okay is the only word I say today resonated with me because if you've ever been dissociated for a while or even just had a brain weird few days, you might lose track of how you're feeling. It all blends together in just meh. This could also be talking about zoning out while other people are speaking and only being able to agree, nodding and mm-hmming because you can't actually listen to what they're saying. Hatchworth also strikes me as a robot who dissociates solely because of the portion of his comic where we see him daydreaming about being in Kazoo Land before harsh reality crashes in and we see him in the vault. And, I mean, if you were stuck in an empty vault for 70 years, you'd probably start to daydream about a better place, too. Speaking of daydreaming, let's talk about the John and Mad, or maladaptive daydreaming. Mad is a type of dissociation where you create elaborate and sprawling fictional worlds, acting them out in your mind and creating storylines for the many characters in them. Of course, daydreaming is something everyone does from time to time, and especially if you're a creative person, you might have worlds for your OCs that you think about a lot. Mad is when this behavior is involuntary, out of control, or affects your day-to-day life. When you're trying your hardest to concentrate on something you actually want to do, but you can't stop thinking about your characters. You're not choosing to daydream, which is an important distinction. If it's not involuntary, or maybe it used to be maladaptive, but it's not as intense anymore, like me, you could call it immersive daydreaming, which is much the same thing without the disorder aspect. Now, the John. This is probably the headcanon I have the least proof about, as it's mostly interpreting lyrics and picking out character choices by John's actor in very specific videos. But I love it anyway, and Mad John is very special to me, so here we go. The John songs are often nonsensical, exemplified most obviously in Juju Magic with its very nonsense lyrics. John, You're Going Crazy and Hey Man, Are You Listenin' both make it sound like the song is happening in his head and his siblings wondering what the hell is going on. Sound of Tomorrow, Little Birdie, and Circuitry have the same kind of vibe, where you're left thinking what exactly the song was about. They still slap though. John also has a particular attachment to the heroes of SPG, the most obvious being Captain Albert Alexander. As the Spine sings about his death, John interrupts the song with sobbing. Spine has to remind him that it's just a story, even though more often than not he continues with a real story. The official video has some other moments, like John mouthing the words when he's not actually singing, and the fact that he's oddly still during most of the song, as if his mind is elsewhere. When performing Rex Marksley at the San Diego Zoo, John mimes out his life similar to Rabbit during the Captain song. The difference between the two, though, is how the song begins. With Captain Albert Alexander, Rabbit does the introduction as herself, and then briefly shuts down before starting what seems to be a pre-recorded mime sequence. She's still Rabbit throughout the sequence, though, as evidenced by her ridiculous dance break. With Rex Marksley, Spine and Rabbit ask John if he's ready for cowboy mode, before Rabbit messes with something in his back and he shuts down. When he powers on again, he goes straight to mime and doesn't stop until the song ends. I like to think of cowboy mode as John daydreaming about Rex Marksley, going through his life as his siblings sing the song about him. Many daydreamers will act out their thoughts too, although maybe not to this extent. The context of cowboy mode is interesting as well. In the majority of the videos I've found, John is reluctant to enter it at first. He has to be convinced, either because he wants to entertain the audience, just wants to get it over with, and in some cases Rabbit just does it anyway. It's to some degree involuntary, as it seems he can't put himself in cowboy mode. It reminds me of how daydreams can feel sometimes. You don't necessarily want to do it, but the urge is so strong that you give in. That's all I have for disability representation in SPG. Overall, I think the band does a good job with representation. Rabbit is spectacular, and Norman is done well even if we don't see much of him. 6 may not be the best considering his mask, but the comic story isn't finished yet, and we still don't know what the 7th will bring. Also, whether intentional or not, the band provides a lot of ideas to play with regarding the Walterbots and disability, even if it may not be explicitly canon. I hope you enjoyed my ramblings. Subscribe and do all that YouTube stuff, I guess, if you want. I have multiple new SPG videos already in the works, including a timeline and lore walkthrough for those of you who want to learn more about the more obscure history, the Walter family tree, and what the hell the Vice Quadrant story is about. You can tip me on Ko-fi if you like my work or want to commission me to draw silly robots. You should support the band too on Patreon. That's it, I think. I don't know how to end a video, help me.